Thank you for joining us for this webinar where we'll explore the new generation of soil conditioning technology. And to help us understand the background and some of the science behind the technology, I'd like to welcome Terracottem's Technical Manager, Davy Ottevaere. Now, Davy's joined us from Belgium, the home of great beer, and it must be said, some of the world's greatest cyclists. And having been with Terracottem for over 20 years now, it's fair to say that there isn't much that David doesn't know about getting the best out of our soils. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat bar and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Davy. Davy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alistair. Also from my side, welcome to this webinar on soil conditioning and soil conditioning technologies. My name is Davy, I'm the company's technical manager. I'll be guiding you through this webinar, telling you what soil conditioning is, why there's a need for soil conditioners, and how we can help you achieve your goals. So this is a very good definition we used a couple of years ago in a big European Union funded research program called SUSTAFOR, or Sustainable Afforestation. What is highlighted in yellow is very important here. So soil conditioners are basically all products incorporated in the soil with the aim to improve the soil physical and soil chemical features and to compensate those features which can be lacking or limiting for plant development. So that was a huge project that was done in various climatological areas in which different soil conditioners, amongst others, our Terracottem Arbor, were tested. And the report was very positive. There was an unquestionable conclusive effect of our soil conditioner, both on the tree growth, so both positive effect on above and below ground biomass production, so bigger trees, bigger root system, and also on the tree water status, which is basically a parameter for drought in the leaves. So let's get back to the definition and the last sentence: to compensate a feature which can be limiting for plant development. That's actually a question we have asked many horticultural officers over the past 2 decades. And we asked them what are the main issues they face in the establishment and maintenance of their projects. And these were the common answers we received. All challenges related to soils. So poor soils, saline soils, shallow soil profiles, compaction, waterlogging, things like that. All issues related to climate, rainfall, too much rain, too little rain, heat, drought, vandalism, for example, young trees being damaged directly after planting. Some other challenges were related to water availability, water costs, water quality, plants, the plant selection, of course, but also the quick establishment or not, high mortality rates or not, lack of root development, pests, diseases, challenges with people, the management of the people, their knowledge, training of the staff, the follow-up, can we meet their expectations, yes or no, and all challenges with budget, the costs, of course, of the plants, but also people, labor needs to be paid, inputs, maintenance, follow-up, it all costs money. And as a result, this is a follow-up question we asked: what is the long-term effect if you don't address these issues? And these were the most common answers: higher operating costs, incomplete projects, the need to replace plants, having to redo the job, and high liability. It would be interesting to hear what your challenges are, of course. These are some of the situations we've encountered during the time we are selling Terracottem. Inadequate plant holes, inert soils, polluted or saline soils, no or lack of soil structure, too low water retention, too low nutrient retention capacity, lack of water at all, irrigation causing traffic disruptions, irrigation failures, waterlogging, high mortality rates. Let's dive into the history of soil conditioning. Since early times, Man has tilled the soil and added organic residues to the soil in order to improve it for agricultural purposes. And until the end of the 18th century, the humus theory was widely accepted, meaning that people thought that all necessary substances for plant growth came directly from the organic matter in the soil. And it wasn't until the 1830s when the first scientific evidence appeared that there was also the need for minerals for good plant nutrition. One of the leading scientists was Liebig. I remember the name. I will be telling you something more about him later on. But however, the soil science behind it only grew very slowly. That's because most people still believed that organic matter was key, and there was abundance of cheap organic matter, manure, for example. And in the early 1900s, soil erosion became a big problem, especially in the United States, where there was a big drought and lots of lands were eroded, causing big famine. And that really jump-started the research then. And more recently, soil amendments were developed. Why is there a need for soil conditioners? To control that soil erosion, to improve the soil structure, to increase the nutrient content and the nutrient retention in your soil, to optimize the air and water household in your soil profile, to increase water retention capacity, to improve the drainage characteristics of your soil. The first man-made soil conditioner that came onto the market was called Trillium. That was in the just after World War II, at the late 1940s, early 50s, which was basically a linear chain of polyacrylamide, so a linear super absorber. It wasn't very stable, so it wasn't a very good success. Later on, science discovered ways also to make three-dimensional structures, cross-linked structures over acrylic acid with those linear polyacrylamides, making the superabsorbers as we know them now. The diaper industry is still the biggest market for that, but it's a different type of superabsorber. They can hold lots of water, but they can't release it anymore. Obviously, otherwise your diaper wouldn't work. In agriculture, we tweak the chemical structure a little bit. We add potassium, we add ammonium to the chemical molecule, and as a result, the superabsorber can release and also can absorb and also release the water again for the plant. And in the early 1980s, our story started when Professor Van Cottem and his team at the University of Ghent started his research. He was looking for a way to stop desertification. That was the time with the big famine in Ethiopia and Bob Geldof organizing Life Aid. So that was about the same time frame there. And he was looking for a way to do that with minimum amount of inputs. So he discovered that in desert environments, it's not the amount of rain that is the limiting factor. It's basically the soil. It rains sufficiently, but it rains with too high intensity. So much of the rain simply drains away. The soil cannot hold it. And also the soil is not capable of absorbing the scarce nutrients that are available. So he has done a lot of laboratory tests, and then he also went to Africa and did a big trial here in Burkina Faso. This is now 1988, and he only treated the plant holes with the mixture. So there's no soil treatment whatsoever in between those plant holes. And 2 years later, he went back and he took this picture. And as you can see, the trees are establishing quite well. There was no extra water given, so the trees were planted just before the rainy season. And he only made one mistake. He forgot to put the fence around the test area. So some goats came and ate some of the young trees. That's why there are some of these plant holes without any trees in it. But that opened up his eyes because he noticed now there was grass growing in those plant holes, although he didn't seed any grasses. And that opened up the market for us later on to use terracotta on pure sandy soils, on golf courses, on football pitches, for example, on very coarse soils. With soil amendments, it's possible to have good grass development. But let's get back to this project. Another 4 years later, you can see the trees are maturing quite well. And what was very interesting, and he reached his goal now, because now in between, although there was no soil treatment there was also new vegetation. So he was able to reverse desertification. The main reason for that is that, just a minute, with the same amount of rain, he's now more water retains available for those plants, because rain is now caught in the canopy of the leaf. So there's a delay now of the rainwater falling on the ground. So the speed of the drainage is lowered. Also, the runoff is lowered because, again, due to the presence of the canopy, it doesn't directly hit the ground. And also some of the dead leaves are dropping on the floor, increasing organic material in the soil, and also limiting the runoff. The root system is developing, also increasing soil structure, so erosion is under control. Shade is created, no direct sunlight anymore hitting the soil, so temperature is lowered, evaporation rates are lowered, causing also establishment of vegetation in between the trees. So in 1993, he concluded his research, and yeah, I will read it. The conclusion was that even in the poorest soil conditions, a wide variety of indigenous trees, grasses, vegetables, and herbs now flourished, reversing the devastating pattern of desert encroachment, deforestation, and wind erosion. And at that time, the product was commercialized. However, we didn't stop with our research. We still do research at the moment. I'm responsible for our research department. We test new ingredients, but we also test the products in different soil types, different cultivations, different climates, and other applications. We do that in collaboration with independent research institutes, but also in our own greenhouses. If we look at soil level, what do plants need to grow? Basically, it's quite simple. They need oxygen, they need water, they need some minerals, and they need some organic growth activators like humic acids. And all these elements normally are absorbed by the roots, some of them through the leaves, but it is important to realize that they are all present in our soil conditioners. I told you that I would be telling you something about Liebig, the scientist. He also came up with the law of the limiting factor. I think you're all familiar with the expression that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. That's what is the law of the limiting factor all about. So plant growth is controlled not by the total amount of resources available, but by the scarcest resource, by the limiting factor. So by taking away the limiting factor, so by providing all ingredients that are required for qualitative plant development, you can have the best plant growth you can imagine. All of our soil conditioners are mixtures, proprietary mixtures of more than 20 components from different groups, and they all assist plant growth in a synergetic way. We can divide those components into 4 main groups: growth precursors, the polymers, fertilizers, and carrier material. I can show you a short animation video showing how the product works. So you mix it dry in the root zone. The colored dots here are the nutrients. The pale ones are the super absorbers. When rain is coming or irrigation water is coming, the nutrients go into the soil solution, which is absorbed by the polymers. So drainage and leaching is limited. The tiny root hairs, they now grow, they penetrate the super absorbers, they access the nutrients, they access the water, and they can thrive on that. This is a continuous process. So if new rain is coming again, the polymers will swell get saturated and provide water for the plants. Let's go into detail on those 4 groups. The growth precursors, which play a very important role during the initial growth phase of the plant. They activate root cell elongation and differentiation. So basically, they produce more root cells, longer root cells. As a consequence, above ground, there's better leaf development. There's also more biomass production. And underneath the soil, underneath the surface area, the roots are encouraged to grow more rapidly to depths where more water is present. This is a short demonstration trial we've done in these glass plates, in which we compared the root development of garden cress during the first 5 days after seeding, with and without the growth precursors. We took the digital images at regular intervals and plotted that data of the root length into this graph, and you can see during the first couple of days there's a significant effect of the root growth precursors, which is also visible here in those root samples. These are root samples coming from a trial area on sports turf. On the left-hand side, you see a soil sample on the soil we regularly use in Belgium. We basically seed sports turf on the soil that's available. We don't do any soil improvements whatsoever. Although we have guidelines, you can see in the middle. Also, I think like you have coming from STRI and other specifiers, in order to build soil profiles built out of 90% sand, 10% of peat, which will provide you with more roots, better roots. But what happens if you add the soil conditioning technology? You can see that on the right-hand side, you get these firm root samples with lots of roots, deep roots. I also have a video accompanying this slide. This was a trial area that was constructed in collaboration with European Turfgrass Society, and lots of soil scientists from all over Europe came and visited those plots. You can see the pictures weren't photoshopped or whatsoever. The polymers then, they absorb water which is normally lost due to evaporation and leaching. The polymers can absorb a multiple amount of volume of their own weight in water, and thus reducing both the volume and frequency of irrigation. And very importantly, and this is different with polymers, for example, inside diapers, almost 100% of the water inside the polymers is plant available. So if you look at the microscopic image here on the right, you can see that the roots, they really grow through the polymers and they can access that water. There's a relationship in the soil between the amount of water and the force in which that water is held. And I can demonstrate this with my third and final video. Imagine a very shallow soil profile here represented by the sponge. The excess water will drain away. You can see on the bottom. And if you have a thicker profile, more water will drain away. That's because the force now exceeded the gravity on that soil profile is now getting better, so drainage is increased. If you create an even thicker soil profile, more water will drain away. You're probably asking now why I'm telling you this, because if you plot that relationship between the amount of water present in the soil on the x-axis and the force in which it's held to the soil on the y-axis, you get a shape like this. And for a sandy soil, this is completely different. For example, if you compare it with a clay soil or a loamy soil. Now, I won't go into detail, so I'll skip a few slides. But in a sandy soil, the majority of the water will simply drain away. All the water that is in the soil with the force less than the value 2 here will simply drain away due to gravity. So the majority of water will simply be lost. That's one of the reasons why you use sand, because it has a high drainage capacity. And a small percentage of the sand, of the water, excuse me, will be bounded to the soil particles that strongly that it's not plant available. And that's the percentage here represented above the 4.2. Meaning that only 5% in a sandy soil of the water is plant available. In a clay soil, the situation is reverse. More water will be held, but also more water will be bounded to the soil strongly. But the result will be that 22% of the water is plant available. What our soil conditioning technology does, it basically pushes that curve to the right and to the top, making more plant water available. So a sandy soil with soil conditioning, only 5% of plant available water. With our technology, you can get up to 25% of plant available water in your soil without changing the soil characteristics. So you will still have the same drainage capacity, but just you will increase the water retention. And that force field that the water is available for the plant. The third group is the fertilizers. It's the balanced mixture of both macro and micro elements, depending on the 4 different soil conditions we have different fertilizers. And finally, the carrier material. We have different reasons why we use the carriers. One of the main reasons is because our carrier material have their own chemical and physical properties. For example, they have a high cation exchange capacity. I don't know if you're familiar with the expression cation exchange capacity. Is the capacity of the soil to exchange positively charged ions or cations with the soil solution. So it's basically a measure of soil fertility. The higher that value, the more fertile your soil will be. A sandy soil has almost 0 cation exchange capacity, so it's basically inert. A clay soil is more fertile because it has a higher cation exchange capacity. That's the reason why most agriculture, for example, is performed on clay soils, because the soils are more fertile. What we do in order to increase the cation exchange capacity, we add organic material like manure, for example, to a soil, which is here represented in the brown rectangle. Or you can add amendments like Terracottem, which also increases cation exchange capacity. The advantage of using Terracottem is that, again, you increase water retention, you increase cation exchange capacity, but you don't change drainage rates. If you add too much organic matter, you will lose your drainage speed. Each Terracottem component has its effect on plant growth, but it's above all the synergetic effect of all these components which makes our technology so unique and successful. On the left, you see a graph on a comparative plant growth trial we've done. On the one side, on the product's individual components, and on the other side, on the mix in its whole. And afterwards, we've compared biomass production of each component with the biomass production of the total soil conditioner. And we observed that almost 50% of plant growth was coming from our fertilizer, which is no surprise. 10% is coming from the polymers. I'm only talking about biomass production. I'm not talking about water retention or other benefits, only biomass production. The growth precursors were responsible for 21% approximately of the growth. Carrier material on plant growth that's more or less inert material, so it doesn't really stimulate plant growth in itself. It only increases the cation exchange capacity. But as you can see, this 21% we cannot explain, meaning that the sum of the individual parts is less than the combined effect, the synergetic effect. And that's what the law of the limiting factor is all about. Plant growth will be determined by the limiting factor. Benefits of using our technology, you get better plant growth because you stimulate root development. Plants are established better and faster, seeds will germinate faster. As a result, you get healthier plants, increased yields, lower mortality rates, possibility, for example, important in horticulture, agriculture, possibility for earlier harvesting, so shortening of the growing season. We optimize water consumption by increasing the water retention capacity. We have reports stating water savings up to 50%. We also optimize the usage of fertilizers. We already have fertilizers in the mix that provide us with good plant growth, but we also increase cation exchange capacities, limiting nutrient leach off, and as a result, better using of the fertilizers. We increase the microbiological life in the soil. The plants have a high resistance to drought, to diseases. And it's now possible to have plant growth in marginal soils like saline soils, degraded soils, up to a certain level, of course. Yeah. Some references, reasons also why people are using the technology if they want to increase survival rates. This is a project we have done in the south of Spain, not on a sandy soil, by the way, on a very compacted, heavy soil, where we transplanted very old olive trees. All the tree experts told us, yeah, you can't do that, you will have too high mortality rates. But we managed to get a survival rate up to, I think it was 89% or something like that. And this is a picture we took the other day as the situation as it is today. A project in which the officer also wanted to have a higher survival rate in Norfolk. As an insurance policy, this is a very important reason. If you plant these big specimen trees which cost thousands of euros or British pounds, then it doesn't matter if you add a few tenths of pounds by simply enhancing your soil substrate with Terracottem. It doesn't really matter on the budget now, but you are guaranteed that the tree will survive. This is not only true for root bolt planting, but also bare root shrub plantings can be treated with the soil conditioners. This was a soil specified by Tim O'Hare to increase the water holding capacity. Faster and better plant establishment. This project manager in Warsaw aims at 100% guarantee for rapid growth and excellent rooting of his plants with a minimum of irrigation. So he had quite a narrow objective, and he succeeded. In environmental restoration projects, this is a decommissioned coal mine in Belgium, which on top a shallow soil profile was put in place, enhanced with Terracottem. Yeah, these are a few nice pictures of our environmental restoration project in Australia, where there was a need to turn this sewerage pond into a wildlife lake. In 2013, the soil was treated and young trees were planted. 2014, 2015, you can see the vegetation has established quite successfully. And also the wildlife came back, so the birds came back, some mammals, lots of insects, butterflies. So this project was a huge success and got quite some news coverage in Australia. Savings in water or watering costs is also a main reason. For these planters, for example, it's possible to reduce irrigation frequencies from 3 times a week to once a week. This is not only true for flowers, but also for newly planted trees, especially if you're facing the hot summers like we get the last years. Higher water retention was an objective here in Piccadilly Gardens. Limited growing space. The tree or the shrubs can only develop in these concrete plant holes, so you have to make the most of it. So it's possible to have very good root growth and as a consequence plant development in a limited growing space. This is actually quite a funny story. In Berlin, we had this project with lots of trees being planted, and 6 months after planting, one of the trees was hit by a car, so needed to be replaced. And we excavated the tree, and we took this picture because it's not often we get the chance to take a picture of a root system for a newly planted tree. And you can see 6 months after planting, marvelous root development. Limited growing space is also something which you have, of course, in roof gardens, shallow root zones, and also these projects are susceptible to high summer temperatures, strong winds. Better cultivation practice. I put this slide in. I know Malaysia is a long way from home, but it's an interesting story because this grower was very fond of using his own fertilizer program. And we told him, okay, well, let's make a comparative trial. You can use your fertilizers, but we'll do some combinations. And we actually did three treatments. Objects number 1 is the soil he's using with his own fertilizer. Object 3 is the same soil without fertilizer and with TerraCottem. And object number 2 is the same soil with TerraCottem and 1/3 of his fertilizer, which gave the best result. And as a consequence, this grower now could produce bigger oil palms with only using 33% of his fertilizers. And he could shorten his growing season drastically, so he could sell more palms, making more money in the same period of time. Better growth closer to home with these tulip trees with and without TerraCottem. Flower beds is also a big market for us. For the visual appearance, you want to have the most beautiful flower beds you can imagine. Sometimes we do the projects, sometimes we do the projects and we consider them as test areas, which we have done here in the city of Oudenaarde in Belgium, underneath the bridge with difficult growing conditions, lots of shade. On the left-hand side, this flower bed was treated with TerraCottem. The right-hand side bed was left untreated. You can see the difference. And this horticultural officer told me now that he can plant a larger surface area with the same amount of plants or the same amount of flowers by using TerraCottem in his flower beds. Another flower bed in United Kingdom. So this brings me to the end of my presentation with some important things to remember. The lack of water, especially during the warmer summer months, is a limiting factor for plant growth, and you can't have limiting factors, otherwise you won't have good plant establishments. Another thing to remember is that recently planted trees can do with all the help they can get, especially during the first 2 years after transplanting them. Not all soils are capable to have good plant development, so some soils need improvements. And it's important to get the soil right from the start. You can't start all over again, or it will cost you a lot of money. So soil conditioners can help you achieve your goals, and GreenTech can tell you all about it, which one will suit your project best. So that's it. Just for your attention, in 2018 we celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we came up with this 25 storybook. If you use this QR code or use this link, you can download your free copy. So thank you for your attention.